The first year of Aether Raids had proven to be a turbulent one. This new game mode added a completely new level of competition and difficulty to the game. The community responded by learning more about the game than ever been known before, and also developing a deadly and competitive metagame. Throughout the first year, 4 major strategies for offense would be established: omni-tanking, hit and run, gale force, and vantage sweeping. And amongst these strategies, omni-tanking and vantage sweeping would be the most prominent. On the defensive side, several powerful defense archetypes would emerge, such as Infantry Pulse, the Cav Line, the Fireball, and even hybrid teams that relied on rally traps or restore traps. But not all these defense teams would make it through the emergence of Book 4. Book 4 would prove to be unlike anything that had been seen in any Fire Emblem game before. We would get fairies. That's right, fairies. I think Phoenix Master captured the community's confusion the best.
It's all about fairies. It really threw me off, honestly. And if you took out Alphonse and Sharina, and if you showed me this footage, I would never be able to tell you that this is from like Fire Emblem.
While the community's opinion was all over the place, some ecstatic, others angry, some even confused, there was one thing for certain: Book 4 was here, and it was ready to shake up the meta. The first major impact of Book 4 would come in the form of our new free-to-play Mythic hero, Peony. Peony was a powerhouse of a Mythic and was easily the best Mythic available at the time, even though not everyone agreed on that. Many people thought Air would remain the dominant Mythic with her powerful resistance buff compared to Peony's speed buff, but Peony would quickly prove how powerful she could be. The power of having a Mythic slot combined with a Dancer was something the community wasn't ready for, and defenses started being destroyed almost immediately. At the time, Aether Raids offense only had 5 slots, and so when you break down a team composition, often there wasn't enough room to fit in the Dancer, or if there was, you could only run 1. Typically the team consisted of your main carry, be it a tank, vantage sweeper, hit and run unit, or even a gale force engager. Then you'd have 2 mythics, which were necessary if you wanted to score highly, though whales sometimes ran 3 even at this point. Then there would be the bonus unit slot, and then lastly your flex slot. For most people, even if they wanted to run double Dancer, it just wasn't an option before Peony. But now Peony would throw open the gates to all kinds of degenerate player-based strategies. It was now even possible to run up to 3 Dancers. EV strats began to emerge all over for people who were lucky enough to pull extra copies of Peony. All kinds of powerful units, such as Ophelia, Reinhardt, and many more, began to wipe out defense teams like they were story maps, and it was all due to Peony. What made Peony even better was that she offered a +3 to all stat buff and the formation buff to the team, allowing for all kinds of crazy hit and run strategies in Light Season. Unfortunately, the first victim of Book 4 would quickly arrive. The first defense archetype to be crushed under Peony's immense power was the Fireball archetype, which had already been struggling due to the map nerfs earlier in the year, but was now considered a free win. The defense archetype failed to apply the pressure it once was able to, and became easy pickings for hit and run teams that could snipe the front line before backing up to safety. If that wasn't enough of a meta shaker, another would premiere on Peony's debut banner: Close Call. Close Call would be the first of a line of speed-based damage reduction skills that would shake up the tanking meta. Before the introduction of this skill line, speed had been consistently losing value in the metagame. The weakness of speed as a stat was one of the many reasons people underestimated Peony. While speed had been one of the most dominant stats on release in Fire Emblem Heroes, over time it became less and less important. This was largely due to the many effects that either denied doubles or guaranteed doubles that had been introduced throughout the 2nd and 3rd year of Fire Emblem Heroes. It was also due to the most dominant strategies in Aether Raids, omni-tanking and vantage. In vantage strats, typically the vantage sweeper would get units low enough on HP that they would kill them with a single hit, so it didn't matter if the defense units were faster. Omni-tanking mostly relied on stacking defense and resistance to the point that they took almost no damage, so doubling wasn't the biggest deal in most situations, though there were units like Legendary Alm where it could be quite problematic. The other major factor was the prominence of the Bolt Tower on offense. Bolt Tower was an essential building at this point, and often could cripple the enemy team enough that your tank could kill the unit back in one hit, though this often came down to the ability to snipe the defense healing tower. With the emergence of Close Call and the other future speed-based damage reduction skills, speed would become a dominant stat once again. While speed's only value before was either allowing a unit to double or to deny doubles, now it could offer up to 40% damage reduction. This meant that having more than 5 excess speed actually had value now. It also helped that Merida herself was a great unit, and at the time had the highest speed stat in the game, and a weapon that offered +4 to all stats and null follow-up. Merida would be the first unit to introduce the Godsword meta that would sweep through the keep, but she wouldn't be the last. Many units, old and new, would jump on the speed stacking bandwagon and carve themselves out a part of the meta. Though not all these units were available at the release of Book 4, many of the most notable units would be Larcy, Shannon, Fallen Ike, male and female Byleth, and so many more. These units were able to single-handedly take on entire defense teams by themselves, and Peony was the unit helping to enable all of it. Before the Godswords had their chance to smash the meta, the community once again came to life with excitement as the highly anticipated 3rd anniversary was approaching. The community was full of debating, left and right, who to vote for the free unit this year. No one wanted a repeat of the fiasco of the year before, where Legendary Lyn had made it onto the banner. The campaigning for candidates was fierce, but amongst all the great candidates, 2 were discussed the most: Altina and Duo Alphonse. Duo Alphonse was the shiny new duo unit who had been released on the New Year's banner, and unlike the duo units before him, his duo skill was considered extremely powerful, granting -2 special cooldown to infantry units around him. On the other hand, we had Altina. Now if you remember from the last video, Altina was extremely popular on release, and considered extremely powerful. But if that wasn't enough of an incentive, Intelligent Systems had given the community one more. Many people expected the Book 4 Mythic to be Astra, to balance out the seasons, but instead we had received another light Mythic. This essentially meant that many players had no Astra Mythic at all. This meant no Mythic buffs and no additional scoring. People saw this as their chance to force IS to finally give the Astra Mythic they deserved. But Intelligent Systems had their own ideas on that subject, and not only that, they decided to make this Anniversary FEH channel one to remember, but for all the wrong reasons. The FEH channel arrived, and with it came one of the most horrible periods in the FEH community. While the FEH channel covered similar topics to past anniversaries, such as Choose Your Legend results and the new Valentine banner, it would also introduce FEH Pass, the most controversial addition to the game ever. FEH Pass offered new skins and improved stats for old 5 stars, additional resources such as orbs via quest, and several quality of life features such as expanded summoner support, a restart button, and the auto start function, and all for the low price of $9.49 USD per month. To say the community was mad would be more than an understatement. The FEH Reddit was on fire, YouTube channel comments were filled with outrage, and even the official Twitter was being smashed left and right. The community created an image just to show how unhappy they were with the new FEH Pass, one in which the new announcer Phoenix was being burned alive. There was no possible way to escape the FEH Pass at this time. It was the subject of every discussion, and even advertised in every part of the game. The community was on constant edge, as FEH Pass haters and FEH Pass supporters were at each other's throats. On the back of this fiasco, it was also announced that the free unit this year would be given away via a voting gauntlet. People's outrage went to insane levels. Voting gauntlets had never known to be fair by any means. Even as a popularity contest, they can often fail due to the unpredictability of multipliers. The whole community banded together to ensure that players would get the best unit possible, and luckily the community succeeded. Altina, who was easily the favorite unit in the competition, came out on top. A majority of the community rejoiced that they would finally be getting their first Astra Mythic, but even this hard-won victory wouldn't last long. It was announced that Altina would be a limited time giveaway, which meant that if you didn't receive her in that 1 month period, she would be lost forever. This meant future players wouldn't even be given the chance to have a free Astra Mythic. The community was once again in an uproar, and it would only become worse when players began to realize Altina wasn't quite the powerhouse unit many people thought she was. Now don't get me wrong, Altina was a great unit at the time, but she had some major problems. First, she offered no real support outside being a smite bot, so if you wanted to use another carry, she didn't offer much help. Secondly, she offered attack as her mythic buff, which was good for Vantage sweeping teams, but didn't offer much to Omni tanks, or the new Godswords. Third, Altina required investment to be a truly powerful unit. She needed an attack IV, merges, and dragonflowers. Unlike other carry units, she couldn't gain any benefits from the mythic buffs, so she didn't get the advantage of free defense and HP from Naga like other units could at the time. Now if you've seen my channel, you know I'm a big Altina user, and at the time Altina was extremely powerful, with full investment. She offered something other mythics couldn't. She was a carry unit. She could Vantage sweep full teams, and the best part was she combined the mythic slot on your team with the carry slot, which meant you had more room on your team to run supports, such as dancers, debuffers, or chill soakers. Also, Altina had just recently gotten one of her best partners, Layla. Layla plus Altina was a deadly duo that allowed the player to snipe problematic units such as hardy berry users, dancers, or healers with Layla, and at the same time allow Altina to dive into the backline of the enemy team. While this combination wasn't extremely prevalent, it was used by many of the top tier whales and proved extremely powerful, dismantling many of the most annoying defenses. While the community morale was at an all-time low after the FEH channel and Altina's distribution, intelligent systems began to introduce some amazing new systems to help out players, especially the free-to-play player base. The first one of these systems would be the Compile Manual system. This system allowed players to gather divine codes, a new type of currency, and exchange it for manuals of powerful 5-star units. This could allow players to get premium fodder for simply playing the game. Skills such as Distant Counter, Close Counter, Null Follow-Up, and Swift Sparrow 3 were now all on the table for free-to-play players. While the system in no way fixed many of the underlying problems with skill availability, it was a nice boon. Another new item would be added to the game known as the Forma Soul. It would allow players to choose a unit they had built in the game mode, Hall of Forms, to add to their barracks. At the time, Forma Souls were only available via spending, but it did allow a way for low spenders to pick up fully built units with premium fodder for a reasonable price. These two new features didn't revolutionize the game in any way, but the next system intelligent systems would add would literally change FEH forever. In April, Sparking would be added to Fire Emblem Heroes. Sparking is a system in which players could summon 40 times on a specific banner, and then be able to choose one of the units on the banner for free. The reason this system was absolutely massive for players is because it established a guaranteed value for your orbs. No longer could you spend 700 orbs on a new heroes banner and not get the unit you were hoping for. If you summoned 40 times, you were guaranteed that unit. This made new units more available to the masses than ever before. Don't forget the availability chart. A unit that can be guaranteed summon will be able to make an impact on the game because more players can use them. No longer were whales or dolphins the only ones available to play with the new toys. Everyone was given the option with some minor orb saving. Of course, the major restrictions being that Sparking was only available on new heroes banners, not seasonal banners or mythic banners. So while this new system would allow players to get powerful new 5-stars or powerful new skills for a guaranteed orb price, it wouldn't allow players to get their hands on the premium new mythic, legendary, or seasonal units, which could often be meta changers. Even so, Sparking would mark a change in the Aether Raids meta. The early years of the Aether Raids offense was defined by free-to-play and 3 to 4-star units that were highly mergeable. The power merges offered units allowed these strategies to flourish, and while there were 5-star exclusive options always available and present in the meta, they were limited by their availability. Often it could take months to see new 5-stars begin to dominate, though there were always exceptions. But with Sparking, 5-star exclusive units were ready to impact the meta on release, and it would mark a massive change for the game mode, a change that is still present until this very day. If there was a single defining factor in Aether Raids for the second year, it would have to be the powerful new mythic heroes that would become available. The first year of Aether Raids was full of less than amazing options for mythic heroes. In Light Season, the only option available was Air, so for a competitive player they had to run 2 copies of Air. For Astra Season, they had the choice of Naga or Altina, but neither offered much when it came to support options. On the defensive side, in Dark Season, players had the choice between Yoon and Sothis. Once again, decent units, but not the cream of the crop by any means. Anima, on the other hand, had Duma and Thrasier. Duma wasn't much to write home about at this time, but Thrasier had proved to be a deadly threat on defense. The Year 2 Mythics would come out swinging, not only with powerful kits, but great support options, and most importantly, being able to combine several roles necessary on a team into a single slot. Though that's not to say every Mythic released in Year 2 were amazing. Peony would be the first ridiculously powerful Mythic, released as I detailed earlier. The second would come in the form of Brammimond, an unexpected character to be added to Fire Emblem Heroes, which had caught the community completely off guard. The same way he would catch offense players with their pants down as he punched holes through many of the most powerful tanks in the meta. Brammimond, just like Thrasier before him, would prove to be the first Dark Mythic that actually felt worth running. Brammimond had several things going for him as a defense Mythic. First, he was our very first colorless mage. This meant that he had a neutral matchup against all the units in the game except Raven Tome users, who were essentially non-existent in the meta. Second, Brammimond was a bulky unit, especially for a mage, and could pack a punch with this massive 40 attack. This allowed him to survive counterattacks and hit back with a powerful special. Lastly, his weapon Void Tome not only granted him more stats, but also a guaranteed follow-up attack, once again helping to invalidate that speed stat. Brammimond was so powerful he could even smash through many of the powerful Godswords. That is, unless they had the coveted null follow-up in their kit, such as Merida. Brammimond was one of the major components that made null follow-up such a desired skill on your tanks. While Brammimond would be a defense-defining mythic for Dark Season, a new offense threat was on their way to shatter Light Season forever. The year before, a powerful new debuff, Isolation, was introduced into the game via Bridal Fjorm. Isolation allowed many popular defenses such as Rally Traps, Restore Traps, and even Dancer Spam to be dismantled. But there were two major problems with Bridal Fjorm. First and foremost was availability. Just like I've mentioned countless times before, availability is one of the most important variables whether a unit can be a meta changer. The second problem was that she took up the team's support slot. While Bridal Fjorm was definitely worth running, even if she took up that valuable slot on your team, it did limit your team options, especially if the units you want to run relied on powerful supports like Brave Lucina or Male Corin. All of these problems would be pushed to the side for Light Season with the introduction of Milla. Milla shattered Light Season as we knew it. The power of having Isolation on a Mythic unit was a game changer. It allowed players to combine a support slot and a Mythic slot into one, allowing them to run essentially an additional unit on their team. Not only that, Milla's Isolation was based off defense, unlike Bridal Fjorm's, which was based off HP. In order to counter Bridal Fjorm, players had began to max merge their dancers and stack HP on them so they couldn't be isolated. While this wasn't the easiest feat to pull off, it was definitely possible due to one major factor. 3 to 4 star dancers were easily mergeable, while Bridal Fjorm was not. Now you may be thinking, isn't that the same case for Milla? Couldn't players just stack defense on their dancers and not be isolated? And you would be partially correct. The major problem was that not many dancers could realistically stack enough defense to surpass Milla. Milla had an impressive 40 defense stat, and that's not even counting her super boon. While there were a few dancers who could realistically beat Milla's defense stat, Dancer Xander and Berkut, they suffered from the same problem as Bridal Fjorm. They were limited seasonal units that were difficult to merge. For the most part, Milla was able to run completely unchecked for months in Light Season, able to shut down defenses that relied on dancers to apply pressure or secure kills. It wasn't until the introduction of Dancer Edelgard and the ability to merge him via Grails that players had a real answer to Milla's Isolation. Just like how Peony's introduction would be the death of the Fireball archetype, Milla's introduction would be another thorn in the side of so many defense teams. The Infantry Pulse archetype and the common traps such as Restore Trap or Rally Trap will lose their dominance over the defense meta. Throughout Book 4, Infantry Pulse had steadily been taking hits, and while Infantry Pulse teams would never completely disappear from the Aether Raids meta, their cut of the meta pie would shrink drastically. This wasn't solely due to the impact of Milla, but instead the small but consistent counters Intelligent Systems had introduced. The first small hit came in the map nerfs of Book 3, which allowed it to become easier to snipe the key units of the Infantry Pulse team. The second hit came in the form of the skill Infantry Pulse. While Infantry Pulse was introduced with Bridal Pent, it became much more available via units like Zed, who were available in the permanent summoning pool. The last major blow against Infantry Pulse came in the form of Pulse Ties, a line of skills introduced on Nils. The Pulse Tie skills allowed specials to be disarmed from anywhere on the map, which made it easier than ever to shut down Infantry Pulse teams with little to no risk. The combination of all these effects helped to push Infantry Pulse teams out of the spotlight in Aether Raids defense. But another defense archetype would take its place, one that had been quietly dominating the defense meta since its inception, the Cav line. The Cavalry line was a powerful defense that was unlike any other defense at the time. The Cav line was a team that focused on stealing the momentum from the offense player by applying pressure on turn 1, and accomplished this by having typically 4 ranged Cav units rush down the map. As I explained in the last video, this team would ignore tanks and attempt to kill the support and mythic units around them. While other defense archetypes were getting nerfed via new skills, map changes, and most importantly, isolation, Cav lines were only growing stronger. In the February 2020 update, defense maps were updated so offense players could now run more offensive structures. While this may seem like a buff to offense players and help them win, actually it was a massive trap. This was due to the way AR maps work. Before the update, players could only have a max of 5 offense buildings, which meant there was always at least one space in the bottom row to hide a character. But with this update, unknowing players could fill their entire bottom row with buildings, which meant there was no safe spots to hide supports or mythic units from the onslaught of the Cav line. This update was a major buff to Cav lines and made it easier than ever to pick off units and secure wins. Another major factor that made Cav lines better was that they weren't reliant on dancers or traps. Infantry Pulse teams and many others relied on dancers to get their units into a threatening position to blow up their enemies, but Cav lines had no need of this. The natural high movement and range of cavalry units meant they were immediately threatening your team from turn 1. So while Milla was literally killing other defense teams, she had little to no effect on Cav lines. If this wasn't enough, the introduction of more defense mythics made Cav lines more powerful. This was due to the way Cav lines are typically built. 4 out of the 6 units rush at the opponent, while 2 units do not. That was the perfect place to put defense mythics, who could offer support to the Cav line by the means of pure stats. One of the best ways to win with a Cav line wasn't to focus on offensive power, but to actually focus on having as many of your cavalry units survive turn 1, to apply more pressure. So stats like defense, resistance, and HP were extremely valuable. So even bad mythics like Sothis, Lif, or Hell, who would typically not offer much to a defense team, could greatly benefit Cav lines by adding survivability. The only thing Cav lines were missing was a good duo unit to enable duo's hindrance, and in turn disable offense players, who were beginning to use the new powerful duo units who were arriving. Luckily, Harmonic Mia would make her appearance, and while she wasn't a phenomenal unit, she was a ranged cavalry unit and could be annoying to kill with her built-in damage reduction. As defense archetypes began to fall left and right, and Cav lines became the dominant meta on defense, a new powerful type of unit began to make their presence known. Duo units had a rocky introduction, and for the most part, many players simply ignored them for months. But soon, that would change, as intelligence systems began to introduce more and more powerful duo effects that demanded the player's attention. The first of these duo units would be Duo Alphonse. Duo Alphonse's duo skill was much more powerful than the ones that came before it, and he quickly proved to be a powerful force in the meta. This is largely the reason why people wanted him so desperately to win A Hero Rises. Not only could Alphonse charge specials with his duo skill on offense, he could be a big annoyance on defense. With a little help from Infantry Pulse or Quicken Pulse, Alphonse could not only hit extremely hard with his preference special, Open the Future, but he could heal up, which proved to be difficult to deal with when you included his double denial in his weapon. Duo Ithune would prove to be a ridiculously powerful tank, and her duo skill allowed her to remove many of her weaknesses. But if we want to talk about the duo unit that really broke the camel's back and made the player base rethink the power of duo units, it has to be Bridal Micaiah, who could offer true damage based off debuffs, with her ridiculous duo skill, Dominance. The reaction from the community could only be explained as shock and awe. People couldn't believe how powerful this unit's duo skill was, and it would send ripples through the meta. People began to watch their defenses die to literally every unit. people began to make videos and posts showing off their level 1 units killing defense maps, including this one of a level 1 Donald killing a legendary Edelgard. Bridal Micaiah's duo skill dominance truly lived up to its name, and it began to warp the meta. Fortunately, there was already an answer for this powerful skill ready, the Duo's Hindrance, a forgotten building that was introduced with the duo units back in Book 3. Players scrambled as they tried to find ways to include duo units on their defense maps to enable the building. The problem was there wasn't many good options at the time. Cav Lines would make do with Harmonic Mia, and other defense maps would try to shove in other duos, though often they didn't carry their weight on the team. This was partially due to the fact that AI did not use duo skills, so the unit was completely reliant on their kit to offer any value. It wouldn't be until much later that duo units designed for defense would make their premiere, and with them bring a new dark meta. With summer passing, Choose Your Legends once again was soon to arrive, and with it would come the Brave Three Houses banner. Fans went insane, wondering what creative and unique units we would get. Would we get Mage Edelgard, Dagger Dimitri, Axe Claude, or even Thunderbrand Lysithea? No, we wouldn't. While this Choose Your Legends definitely lacked the creativity that others had, it definitely didn't lack in power. Well, except for Brave Dimitri. Amongst the Choose Your Legend units, Brave Claude and especially Brave Edelgard were proved to be powerful new additions to the meta. Brave Claude allowed players to have a powerful healing ranged tank. He was also able to snipe deadly threats from a distance and then tank everything else with his ridiculous 50% max HP heal whenever he procced his special. On the other hand, Brave Edelgard broke the concept of what an armor unit was. She had the powerful BST of an armored unit, but better movement than infantry units. She could also apply -6 attack and defense on foes, teleport to allies within 2 spaces, a guaranteed follow-up in both phases, and 80% damage reduction on follow-ups in the enemy phase. It's almost like Intelligent Systems loves Edelgard or something, and gave her a busted Brave version. But don't worry, that definitely wouldn't happen again, right? The Brave units quickly began to appear in the meta, and while they didn't warp it, they were powerful additions that players had to be prepared to deal with. The 4.8 version update also brought with it another upgrade to the escape ladder, once again adding another layer of protection for offense players against powerful defense teams or their own mistakes. September would prove to be a meta-defining month, as it would bring along version 4.9 and some of the biggest meta-shifting units to hit the game. To be clear, not all these units would hit the meta with a splash, but with time they would prove to become powerhouses. The first of these units came with a refinery update of 4.9. This refinery update gave powerful new refines to the winners of Choose Your Legends 2. Celica and Ephraim had 2 amazing refines that helped fix some of the major problems that had plagued them before. Veronica got a tame refine, mostly due to the fact that she was already an extremely powerful unit and was still considered by many to be the best healer in the game. But if we are talking about the unit that would become the king of the meta, it has to be Brave Hector. Brave Hector on release was considered a very good unit, but he would quickly be overshadowed by the release of Legendary Tiki and her higher BST. Intelligent Systems chose to give Hector the spotlight that he deserved, and gave him an absurdly powerful refine. Now I'm sure many of you are aware of what Brave Hector can do, but let's quickly go over how ridiculous it truly was. Hector's refine nullified his armor weakness, neutralized his penalties, inflicted attack and defense -6. And this was all on top of the existing effects he already had, that gave him an enemy phase guaranteed follow-up attack and stopped the opponents. This refine transformed Brave Hector into a complete monster. So you may be wondering, why didn't Brave Hector destroy the meta immediately? And there are a few reasons for that. First, he lacked healing. Brave Hector could run a soul build that would let him heal, but at the cost of the major power that came alongside a bonfire build. Secondly, the meta at the time was focused on applying high pressure across the whole team. This meant that often enemy teams could run right past Hector and murder all his supports and mythic units. Hector was a low movement armor, which meant he heavily relied on good positioning to stop the enemy team, which could be difficult. He also had no way to deal with healers who ran the Razzle Dazzle combo. They could simply hit him over and over with the help of a dancer until he was dead. These major problems kept Brave Hector from being the dominant force in the meta that he would eventually become. But that was not all that September had in store for us. September would also introduce Trait Fruit, a new type of premium currency that would finally fix a problem that had plagued the player base since the game's inception: bad boons. Trait Fruit would allow players to give their units the perfect set of IVs, to ensure their units were running at full power. This wouldn't have a major effect on the meta, but it would allow players to have more control of their unit's stats, which in some cases could allow for some unique builds or to hit some very important HP thresholds. The long-awaited Dancer banner would arrive, and with it we would receive our first Cavalry Dancer. Even at the time, this was a massive boon to defense teams, as players could have more flexibility with their positioning of their dancers. It also allowed Cav Lines to have a dancer that could work well on their teams, not only having the proper movement type to keep up with the rest of the team, but also offer a duo hero to activate the highly desired duo's hindrance. September would prove to be the month of the Dancer. At the end of the month, players would finally have access to the highly desired Astra Dancer, Plumeria. Peony had been the introduction of the Fairy Dancers for the beginning of Book 4, but throughout the year we would receive 4 Fairy Dancers, one for each season. These Mythic Dancers proved to be game changers, and added a ton of power to every season as they were introduced. We've already spoken about Peony, so let's first talk about Mirabilis. Mirabilis was introduced in a completely new way back in June. Unlike any other Mythic before, she was introduced in a new banner called the Midterm Banner. This banner was a new hero's banner, but Mirabilis was the star on the banner. This was amazing for 2 reasons. First, it allowed a Mythic to debut on a banner other than the Mythic banner, or at the release of a new book. Secondly, it meant that Mirabilis was sparkable. That's right, Mirabilis was our first sparkable Mythic unit, and that meant every player could get their hands on this powerful Fairy Dancer for a set amount of orbs. To fully understand how powerful Mirabilis was, we need to take a second look at team building for defense. At the time, Aether Raids defense was composed of 6 units. In order to score well, typically people ran 2 defense Mythic units, 1 to 2 dancers, and duo units were getting popular as well in order to use the duo's hindrance. This meant that 5 of your 6 slots could immediately be taken up just by your Mythics, Dancers, and possibly a duo unit, leaving only 1 slot left for a powerful unit to kill the enemy team. Now this wasn't always the case. In Anima season in particular, the season without Milla, it was normal to run 1 Dancer. In the case of Cav Lines, no Dancers were needed at all, which lent to why the defense archetype had grown in popularity and strength. Also, duo units were not as popular as they are nowadays, though many of the high-ranking defense teams would find ways to put one on their team. Mirabilis came along and she combined 2 of the most necessary roles on a defense team together. This meant that once again, teams had more room for more powerful threats on their defense team. Duo Sigurd also did a similar thing for your team, combining the duo unit slot and dancer slot into one. This consolidation of roles on a team will always allow the player to design a much more threatening map, and that proved to be the case with Mirabilis. While Mirabilis herself wasn't threatening by any means, she did offer a myriad of support. First, she offered the Resistant Mythic buff, granting 5 HP and 5 resistance. This allowed for defense teams to become more bulky, which was massive for teams like Cav Lines that wanted to survive the initial engagement. Second, her weapon and dance offered debuffs, which could cripple enemy teams and stop them from securing kills or surviving engagements. Lastly, she offered flyer mobility, just like the other fairies. This mobility could allow her to run powerful skills like ground orders that could help to set up deadly unseen traps. Our next Fairy Dancer would be Plumeria, and she would quickly prove to be the best Astra Mythic available. Just like Peony, she offered the powerful Speed Mythic buff, and just like all the Fairy Dancers, she would allow players to more comfortably run Dancers in their season. While Plumeria wouldn't be quite as powerful as Peony, trading the Formation buff for debuffs, and attack and resistance over attack and speed, she would be more than enough to blow open the Astra season. Since the beginning of Aether Raids, Astra had always proved to be the more difficult of the 2 seasons. This mostly came down to Mythic availability and power. Air was drastically better than Naga in Year 1. In Year 2, Light Season received Peony and Milla, 2 powerhouse Mythics. But with the inclusion of Plumeria, Astra Season seemed to be finally lowering its guard, and allowing players who were lucky enough to summon her an easier time. Our last Fairy Dancer would come in the form of the Dark Mythic hero Triandra. Once again, having a Mythic Dancer in a season immediately made that season more powerful, and Triandra allowed Dark defense teams to get a major upgrade. Milla had proved to be a menace to the Light Season. She had completely shut down many of the most common strategies and traps in Dark Season. Players had to adapt, and one of the best adaptations at the time was to run 2 dancers. The problem with this solution, as I addressed earlier, was finding room on the team for another dancer. Triandra completely fixed this major problem, though that's not to say she was perfect in her role. Triandra had some major problems. First, the speed buff wasn't as desirable on defense as the resistance buff Mirabilis offered. Secondly, and most importantly, Triandra was a tome dancer, meaning she had more range than Mirabilis. This would prove to be problematic, especially with Triandra's solid attack stat of 37. Triandra was a powerful offensive dancer, which meant it was much easier to bait her out than it was with Mirabilis, who was the only melee fairy dancer we would receive. This meant more often than not, Triandra would not properly do her job of dancing and instead be a bloodthirsty degenerate chasing kills. Even though that was the case, when Triandra did decide to dance, she offered a very powerful dance that debuffed the enemy in cardinal directions of her and her target with -3 to all stats and guard. This dance could easily crush units that relied on their specials for healing or securing kills. The fairy dancers would quickly prove to be some of the most powerful mythics in the entire game, and the meta would feel the full power of Book 4 and its land of dreams. Stepping away from mythics for a second, intelligent systems would introduce 2 more powerhouse meta changers, one in the form of a powerful new special, and the other in the form of a powerful new support. Book 4 had been an interesting year of meta shifts and powerful mythics, but one consistent part of the meta was the powerful damage reduction tanks that had made their debut alongside Peony. Damage reduction was literally everywhere in the meta, from Brave Ike to the Godswords to Brave Edelgard, and it had proven to be a bit problematic. And just as intelligent systems tends to do, after they introduce a problem, they come back to sell you the solution. The solution this time came in the form of the one and only Shinon, or more particularly, in the powerful special he introduced, Deadeye. Deadeye not only doubled the damage dealt by an attack, but more importantly, it nullified damage reduction from non-special skills. Deadeye was just the thing necessary to start punching holes in these powerful damage reduction tanks that ran unchecked all year long. While Deadeye wouldn't shut down the damage reduction meta overnight, or ever truly, it offered a hard counter to many of the most prominent threats in the meta. And the best part was that it was available on a sparkable banner, meaning once again, every player had a chance to pick up this meta-defining skill for a set amount of orbs. The next powerhouse unit would come in the fish-loving Flayn. Flayn was an absurdly powerful healer, who not only introduced a new set of healing skills that could also position allies, but also her powerful preference staff that offered 30% damage reduction to allies within 2 spaces. While Shinon had shown up to destroy the meta, Flayn came to reinforce it. Flayn began to pop up everywhere on Aether Raids offense. She allowed units who had no right to have damage reduction, like Brave Hector, to shrug off hits like they were nothing. Flayn so quickly proved her power as a support unit that people began to run multiple Flayns on the same team to stack up as much damage reduction as they could. Flayn and Shinon would be the opposite sides of the same coin, and they would both bring great options to the metagame, allowing it to flourish. Book 4 was heading towards its conclusion, and with it, we would receive a double mythic banner. The first mythic being the previously mentioned Triandra, and the second being the main villain of Book 4, Freyja. Now while Freyja had a lot of things going for her, and she was a big fan favorite for all kinds of reasons, she did suffer from the Altina syndrome quite a bit. That being, Freyja wanted to be a carry on your Aether Raids team. She came with an extremely powerful preference weapon that offered distant counter, damage reduction, and even an impact effect. If that wasn't enough, her preference B seal, Binding Necklace, granted +2 to all stats, debuffed the enemy -2 to all stats, and stole the enemy's buffs, turning them into debuffs. Freyja had an absurdly powerful kit, but she was lacking some key things in order to be the meta-changing mythic she dreamt of. First, just like Altina, she couldn't receive mythic buffs, meaning she was lacking on HP and other stats that most tanks would have access to. Secondly, she was a cavalry unit, which meant that her BST was naturally lower than most other tanks, who were typically infantry or armored units. Unlike Altina, who only really needed attack because she was a vantage sweeper, Freyja needed every stat she could get her hand on, and the lack of mythic buffs would prove to be her downfall. Of course, there is one more unit to talk about before we could turn that last page of Book 4. A couple of weeks before the release of Triandra and Freyja, they would introduce a completely new seasonal banner, the Ninja Banner. The Ninja Banner was amazing and focused on units who had brave weapons. While many of the units would prove to be powerful, there was obviously one unit that stood above all the rest, Duo Lin. Throughout the year, Duo heroes had begun to prove how ridiculously powerful they could be. Duo Alphonse started the trend, and Bridal Micaiah horrified the player base with the power of domination. But even then, the duo unit who would change the meta forever would be Duo Lin. Duo Lin had a preference Brave Dagger that not only granted 4 speed, but also cooldown reduction. With her scary 38 attack and 42 speed, she could destroy many units with her special proc on the second hit. But let's not dance around the whale in the room. Duo Lin's true power came in the form of the most ridiculous duo skill ever to be released, a built-in second action. That's right, as long as Duo Lin had entered combat earlier in the turn, she could just grant herself another action. To do something comparable, other units had to rely on Gale Force, which not only took up their special slot, but could be difficult to reliably proc. Not only that, Gale Force wasn't even available to dagger units. The icing on the cake was that Duo Lin was a dagger unit because it allowed her to run the often forgotten Disarm Trap skill. While Disarm Trap was used on teams like Air Force, for the most part it wasn't a common skill at this point in the meta. But Duo Lin would immediately change that. Duo Lin could wipe out entire teams with the help of a dancer, or even hit and run, disarming all the threats on the team easily. She proved to be a dominant force in the meta immediately, and the only thing that held her back was her availability, as she was not Sparkle. But as many of you may know, that wouldn't be a problem for very long. But that is a story for the next video. While Duo Lin would be a menace near immediately, her real impact on the meta would come with Book 5. The second year of Aether Raids had come to a close. Unlike the first year of Aether Raids, that had been a storm of innovation, learning, new strategies, and archetypes, the second year would be defined by the immense power of the new Mythics that had been introduced. The powerful new damage reduction skills that turned Omni tanks into gods, and a plethora of powerful counters that had arrived to deal with many of the most powerful archetypes. The community would step into Book 5 on a precipice of a new level of power for units. The community could only sit and wonder, and in fear, of what Book 5 would introduce, and how much more powerful duo and mythic heroes could become. But even the wildest speculation couldn't prepare the community for what was yet to come. Thank you so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed your trip through the second year of the Aether Raids meta. I'd like to give a massive thank you to all the content creators, such as Phoenix Master, Tacho, Acarus, and so many more. Without their videos, there's no way I could have made a video like this. The links to their channel will be in the description down below. Definitely go check out all their channels. If you enjoyed the video, please drop a like and subscribe, it would mean a lot to me. I was hoping this video would be shorter than the first one, but obviously that wasn't the case. This video was a massive undertaking, so I will be taking a break from the History of series, and instead the next FEH report will be on the fun subject of power creep.